Hey, everybody, it's Mrs. Karpinsky here. I know I'm not Mrs. Felsberg, but she is a little bit under the weather today. So I am going to record our live stream for today. And I hope it's something that will be beneficial to you, readers and writers. All right, it looks like that was my first technical glitch because I could still hear my other camera in the background. But what we're going to do, we're going to start by, I'm going to share my screen here. Today, I want to talk about punctuation and punctuating dialogue. I'm going to share that you have these two materials, rules for punctuating dialogue, that should have come in your last take-home material packet, which was last Wednesday. So I would like for you to make sure that you utilize those when you're working on your historical fiction story. Today, we're also going to spend some time going through some slides that I'd like to spend the opportunity to get to know a little bit more about punctuating dialogue. Many of you have already put dialogue into your historical fiction narrative stories. I really appreciate it. You've done a great job with it. Sometimes, though, I have noticed that we've had some problems with how we actually use our punctuation and our grammar, and just putting the dialogue in is a little bit wonky. So I wanted to take some time today to work on that. I'm going to go through this slide deck with you, and then I'm going to share a favorite story. So just bear with me. Okay, using quotation marks. Punctuating dialogue is a way to give your characters life. In other words, instead of just, she went to the store, she went down the road. If we start having characters talking to one another, we can learn a lot more about the characters, we can learn a lot more about the story, we can learn a lot more about the plot, the setting, everything. It just enhances our story. So part of the expectation for fourth grade is that you have already learned how to use dialogue and put dialogue into your stories last year in third grade. So now this year, it's expected that you can do that. For example, dialogue is when characters speak to each other. They have a conversation. Another word for conversation is a dialogue, when two people are speaking to one another. When you write dialogue, you need to use special punctuation marks called quotation marks, or sometimes we call them quotes. To use quotation marks, there's some different rules. First of all, if you have a direct quotation, a person's exact words, you're going to use your quotation marks to enclose that. In other words, you're going to close it in, and they're going to go on either side of it. For example, our T letter says, I try to practice every day. The direct quote, the team leader's exact words, are within the quotation marks. They're inside. Let's go home, Jean suggested. Again, Jean's direct quotation, let's go home, is within the quotation marks. A directly quoted sentence begins with a capital letter, just like all sentences should begin with a capital letter. Mrs. Talbot said, please get a pencil. Please get a pencil could be our very own sentence, could stand alone, wouldn't even have to be part of a dialogue, right? Please get a pencil, capital P. So Mrs. Talbot said, please get a pencil. Again, capital P. Excuse me. Christina asked, is it my turn? Is it my turn? Could be a sentence that stands alone, right? Capital letter. A directly quoted sentence is set off from the rest of the sentence with commas. Okay, this is where things start to get a little more tricky. So pay particular attention here. We're going to use commas to set off other words from the quoted part. Mrs. Hayes said, comma, please line up quietly. Kara asked, comma, may I be line leader? Again, you see the capitals at the beginning, you see the commas, and you see that the quotation, the direct quotation, is within the quotation marks. Okay, what happens when you have split dialogue? That means that you have two pieces of dialogue. When a phrase identifying the speaker interrupts a quoted sentence, the second part of the quotation begins with a lowercase letter. If it's a new sentence, it begins with a capital letter. Okay, so just like we know that if we have a new sentence, we start with a new capital letter. If we have a new sentence that's a sentence, when we have two parts in our quotation, it starts with a capital letter. But if it's not part of a new sentence, it does not. Let me show you. Will you take care of my lawn and pets, comma, asked Mr. Franklin, while I'm on vacation next month? So we could take ask Mr. Franklin out of this, right? Will you take care of my lawn and pets while I'm on vacation next month? And that would make it one long sentence. When it's one long sentence like that, and you could take out the tag in the middle, the speech tag, the speaker tag, when you take that out, you know that this is going to be a lowercase letter because this sentence could stand alone by itself. On the other hand, I am happy to do it, replied Leo. Thank you for the opportunity. Leo's quotation has two separate sentences. I'm happy to do it is one sentence. It can stand alone. Thank you for the opportunity is a second sentence. It can stand alone. Because they're two separate sentences, they each have. The phrase identifying the speaker is called a speaker's tag. So again, replied Leo or ask Mr. Franklin are called speaker tags. A little more on split dialogue. If a quoted sentence is divided, a comma usually follows the first part and comes before the second part. So we don't need just one, we need two commas. Oh, Donna commented. He's probably just saying that because he's never had a cat. Oh, comma. Donna commented, comma. He's probably just saying that because he's never had a cat. So this sentence reaffirms both rules that we just talked about. Oh, he's probably just saying that because he's never had a cat. Could be one long sentence, but it's not. We split it with a speaker tag in the middle. If it were one long sentence, the he's is lowercase. So even though we split it up, the he's lowercase here because it's part of the original sentence. It's not a separate sentence. What happens if you have a quote at the beginning? If a quotation mark comes at the beginning of a sentence, a comma, question mark, or exclamation point usually follows it. All right, let's check it out. Dogs make better pets than cats do, said Jared. Dogs make better pets than cats do. You have a comma, and the comma is inside the quotation marks. Have you ever had a cat? Question inside quotation marks. No, and I never will. Exclamation mark inside the quotation marks. So again, when we have a quotation mark at the beginning of a sentence, so we start at the beginning of a sentence, we're usually going to have a comma, a question mark, or an exclamation mark on the inside. We're not going to have a period though. What if it's at the end of the sentence? If a quotation comes at the end of the sentence, a comma usually comes before it. Ask, comma, what makes you say that? Remember, she's got the capital W, the question mark inside the quotation marks. Punctuation inside quotes. A period or comma should always be placed inside the quotation marks. Okay. I can't wait to see Shirley Caesar's new video, comma, James said, period, new sentence. It's supposed to come out next week, period, inside the quotations. So all of our punctuation is inside the quotation marks, our comma here, our period here. We have a capital I here because it's a separate sentence. I can't wait to see Shirley Caesar's new video, one sentence. It's supposed to come out next week, second sentence. Here's the exception to the rule, however. Don't we always have to have exceptions? A question mark or an exclamation point should be placed inside the closing quotation marks when the quotation itself is a question or an exclamation. So in other words, if we're asking somebody a question, we're going to have the question mark on the inside. But if we have Um, Otherwise, it should be placed outside. If placed on the outside, we don't need to have extra punctuation because we already have it once. For example, what time will you be home from work, comma, mom, question mark. So that's a question, right? What time will you be home from work, mom? Because it's a question, we need to have the question mark here. Whoopsie. Okay, so we have a question mark here, but then to know that the sentence is done, we put a period at the very end because it's the end of the entire sentence, the quotation and the speech tag, the speaker tag. Who said all the world's a stage? Okay. All the world's a stage. Question or statement? All the world's a stage. That's not asking a question, is it? So because all the world's a stage is not asking a question, the question mark goes on the outside of the quotation. Huh? That seems confusing. What are you talking about, Mrs. Karp? Let's go back to the first one. What time will you be home from work, Mom? That's a question, right? What time will you be home from work, Mom? What kind of candy do you like? Okay, when we're asking a question, we put the question inside the quotation. When the whole thought is asking a question, but what's inside the quotation is not a question, the question mark goes at the end. Stop, yelled the crossing patrol. The exclamation goes on the inside because that is stop. It's not stop, yelled the crossing patrol. It's stop, yelled the crossing patrol. So our exclamation follows the point that it's making. What a surprise to hear Susanna say, we're moving back to Puerto Rico in June. Okay, so because what a surprise is part of the exclamation and the excitement, our exclamation goes on the outside of the quotation marks. This is probably the trickiest part of the lesson. Speech bubbles. You guys have got those. I bet you were doing those back in first grade at PBN and PBS. Speech bubbles that you draw above a character's head. Do they need to have quotation marks? No. When you're using speech bubbles, you don't need them because the speech bubble tells us that it's a dialogue between characters. Hints for writing good dialogue. Here's some more helpful hints. Start a new paragraph when you change speakers. Use other words for said. What could I say there? Said, replied, asked, stated, exclaimed. Think of other things that you could say instead of said, 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 said. Obviously, that gets boring after a while. Avoid overusing speaker tags. Sometimes we can just infer who's talking just by reading. For example, I told you already, I said, glaring. Well, I wasn't listening, was I? He said. Apparently not, I replied. Do we really need all these speaker tags? Or could we write it like this? Now, I glared at him. I told you already. Well, I wasn't listening, was I? Apparently not. So I can tell who's speaking because we're going back and forth and I don't have a speaker tag for every single sentence. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. You just have to read it. The best thing that I can tell you is every time that you're writing a story, it's really helpful for you to read your story to somebody else and check it and have them listen to it to make sure that it's making sense. Don't be afraid to use dialogue in your writing. It's going to make your writing better and stronger. And for this historical fiction assignment, it's required. Just be sure to use it thoughtfully. Make every word a character says count. Never overuse it. In other words, it shouldn't be the whole story. It shouldn't be people talking the whole time. It should be extra. It should be something that adds. So let's review. Choose the correct answer. Click to see if you're right. Which sentence has the quotation marks placed correctly? We have Carter's dad said, make sure you do your homework. I love trains, exclamation, Liam exclaimed. Emma announced, I wish I could go to Disney World. Which one do you think's right? I'll give you a second. Make your decision. A, B, or C? Were you right? Carter's dad said, make sure you do your homework. Okay, he's got his comma, he's got his direct quotation with the capital inside his quotation marks, and he's got his period inside. Problem with number 2, exclamations on the outside. Emma announced, we have a colon here instead of a comma. That's not how we punctuated, is it? Nope. So how many of you got it right? Hopefully a lot. Let's try again. Which sentence has the quotation marks placed correctly? I'm not allowed to play video games, Olivia told them. Isabel whispered, we won't tell anyone. Ethan commented, no one will know. I'll give you a hint. This one comes down to the comma placement. You're right. Commas aren't placed properly in A and B. Only C is using the comma that you need to have to set off your speaker tag. Try again. Which one has the quotation marks placed correctly? I'm going to Chicago next week, comma, Maria said. Throw that one out because I don't even have a quotation mark at the end. Have you ever been there before? Question, asked Nate. No, admitted Maria, but my mom has. So I know it's between B and C. Let's look at these carefully. Have you ever been there before? Question mark. Have you ever been there before? Oh, that does sound like the question, right? I don't have to say ask Nate to have a question. So have you ever been there before is a question. So I don't think that's right because I think that question mark should be inside the quotation marks. You said that, you're correct. Because 3 or C is the correct one. No, comma, admitted Maria, comma, but my mom has. And we were smart because we remembered that this is lowercase because no, but my mom has is all one sentence, not 2 separate ones. I know this is confusing. I know it's going to take practice, but you can do it. I promise. One last one. Meow, meow, the striped cat yelled. What on earth is that noise, Mom asked. It's Tiger, replied Marcos. He's stuck in a tree. What do you think? What is correct and what is not? Meow, meow, the striped cat yelled. What on earth is that noise? Mom asked. It's Tiger, replied Marcos. It's stuck in a tree. If you said C, you're correct. Because this is not correct, because the question mark should be here with the question. What on earth is that all that noise? Question. Meow, meow, the striped cat yelled. Uh-oh, we're missing a comma, aren't we? All right. That's the end of that. And at the end of this slide deck are just some other reference sheets. Okay, excellent. So now one thing that I'd like to do is I'd like to share a favorite book with you. Just one more quick historical fiction. But it's kind of interesting. And I've seen 2 or 3, not very many, but 2 or 3 of you kind of done this the same way. So it's pretty exciting to see. And it's where we combine realistic fiction and historical fiction. So let me share with you the Matchbox Diary. As I read it, I want you to pay particular attention to the fact that there's punctuation in here around your dialogue. Whatever you like the most, then I'll tell you its story. There's so many things here. You'll know it when you see it, and then I'll know something about you, the great-granddaughter I've only heard about. So we have a grandpa and a little girl. Obviously, we know now that this is the great-granddaughter of this man, and he's only heard about her. That tells me that it's probably the first time he's ever met her. You like boxes just like me? You smoke cigars? No, either. There's no cigars in it anyway. Well, what's inside? Not just one story, but lots. What's in the little boxes? My diary. Diary. A way to remember what happens to you. Usually, it's a book that people write in. When I was your age, I had a lot I wanted to remember, but I couldn't read or write. So I started this. Open the first one. What is it? It's an olive pit. I put in my palm and I'm right back in Italy. That's where I grew up. Lots of olive trees there. Life was hard. The other reason I saved it. No floor in our house, just dirt. No heat in the winter, except a fire under the cooking pot, and sometimes not enough food. When I'd tell my mother I was hungry, she'd give me an olive pit to suck on. It helped. Who's this? My father. He went to America to work. He sent money home. Lots of Italian men. I was a baby when he left. All I remember about him was his mustache. Once he sent pictures, so we wouldn't forget him. My father never went to school. Back then, most kids had to help their parents all day. He had to get someone to write his letters home from America. When one came, we had a problem. Four older sisters, my mother and me. None of us could read. We had to take it to the schoolmaster. He had a son older than me who could read and write. Every day, that boy wrote down what happened in a diary. Every year, he got a new one, red leather with a silk bookmark. I had no idea how to write, but I was wild to have my own diary. I want one too. That's my girl. There was a year with no rain, no wheat, no macaroni. The schoolmaster wrote a letter to my father for us. We waited. A long time later, a letter came back with tickets to sail to America. When we left, my grandmother cried in the road, "You'll eat the food there and forget your home," over and over. We took a horse-drawn carriage to Naples. It was the first time I'd seen a car, and drinks and bottles, and the ocean. We slept 3 nights on the floor in a steamship station, waiting for our boat. That's where I found the matchboxes. I told my grandmother I wouldn't forget her or anything else. That's when I started the diary. Our ship left. We were at the bottom, where the motion was the worst. People seasick, moaning. My sisters took me up on deck. You like that hairpin? When I found it, I looked up, and high above us were rich ladies in big hats on the upper decks. People said there was gold lying on the ground in America. I thought my mother and sisters would look like those women soon. We were headed for Ellis Island in New York. Someone told me the men would stick hooks in our eyes there. What's a button hook? It's a metal tool for closing up shoes before there were laces. I had nightmares about the button hook men. Then we had bigger problems. A storm hit us, maybe a hurricane. The boat puffed like a horse. I saw a bunch of sailors praying together. Not good. St. Christopher is supposed to protect travelers. People threw medallions of him into the ocean, begging him to spare us. After 3 days, the water calmed. How long did it take you to fly across the country? 5 hours? That trip from excuse me. How long did it take you to fly across the country? 5 hours? That trip from Italy took 19 days. I know because I put a sunflower seed shell in this box every morning. Then everyone was calling La Statua della Libertaria, and I ran up the deck. There was New York. A boat came up to ours selling food. Our neighbors on the ship bought bananas and gave my family one. I bit into it and spat it out. I didn't know you're supposed to peel it. Again, the grandpa is still talking about his journey when his family came to the United States. This is empty, alas. I'll tell you why. We got off at Ellis Island. They didn't want to let anybody in sick, especially people with eye diseases. All morning I've been crying because of button hook man. He was scared of the button hook man. When I saw him, I screamed. He grabbed me and used the handle to roll up my eyelid and look underneath. Red, he said, you can't come in. My mother fainted. My older sister found a doctor who spoke Italian and told him my eyes were red from crying. She gave me peppermint candies to calm me down. Later, a new doctor checked me using his finger. That one let me pass. I put a candy in the box, and the next week he ate it. So in other words, he and his family came in. They entered at Ellis Island, but they had to be checked by a doctor in order to be let into the United States. Why do you think his mom fainted when the doctor said no? Because they were going to get shipped back. They were going to be turned away. So how terrifying, because they were screening them and they thought because his eyes were red from crying, that he actually had an eye disease. So they tried to turn the entire family away because of the little boy. But fortunately, they found another doctor who let them pass. My father met us. Everyone cried. I smelled his mustache to see if it was really him. We took a boat to New York, then a train somewhere else. The next day, we started work in the canneries, all 7 of us, cutting fish all day, always a man watching to make sure we weren't slowing down. They gave us old, falling apart sheds to live in, as crowded as the ship. You didn't have your own room? No, sweetheart. So here's the life of the immigrants. They came to New York and they got a job, all of them, no matter how old or how young they were all working in factories, running businesses, cutting up fish, canning fish, sorting peaches, shelling peas, then down to the south, peeling shrimp, opening oyster shells, wherever there was work. We moved so often I can barely remember where I was or where I'd been. That's why I started saving bits of newspapers, so that someday I could look back and say that I was in that exact place on that exact day. I still love newspapers. So here, we took the date and place, put it up, put it in a matchbox to hang on to it. You can see one of the old vehicles where they're all packed in. So they go from place to place so that whenever work is done at one place, they have to go and move to another place to find work. It was a very tough life. Instead of jewels, my mother and sisters had fish scales on their arms. The strange thing was, when we walked down the street or maybe past a grocery, the same people who bought our cans of sardines wouldn't look at us. Back then, some people didn't want Italians here. Sometimes boys threw rocks. That's how my tooth got in here. You can see him holding his mouth, and you see the boys throwing rocks. So he probably got hit in the face by a rock and then broke his tooth. People were not kind to immigrants who were coming. That box, that's my favorite box, my first baseball game. I didn't understand it, why men were running, but I was in heaven not to be working and to sit by my father. Under the grandstands, I found more matchboxes. Then, in a clump of grass, I found a quarter. That meant we could go to the game again. To me, it seemed like one of the lumps of gold that people had said we would find. So imagine working so hard, and back then a quarter was a lot of money. And it allowed them to be able to go to another baseball game someday. I think I was 8 years old when we got an apartment and all rolled cigars at the kitchen table. A few years later, we started shelling nuts for restaurants day and night. Then my father got hired at a foundry in Pittsburgh making railroad parts. My sisters sewed in a factory. My mother told my father that I should go to school. She'd seen me staring at signs and circus posters trying to understand. Sometimes I draw letters with a piece of coal. She wanted me to learn and to teach my sisters. Big argument. Days and weeks. Why do you think it might have been a big argument back in that time? Certainly education was important, but income was important too. And if he's not working because he's going to school, that's one less person who's bringing money into the household to try to support one another. Who won the argument? I'll give you a hint. I went to school. It was hard. English seemed as crazy as baseball. I had to sit with the little kids. They made fun of how I talked, but I learned to read and write. What they taught us during the day, I taught my sisters at night. Then I went to a different school where I learned typesetting, picking up lead letters from the compartments. That's how everything was printed before computers. I had good eyes from always looking for little things for my matchboxes. I became a printer. So back in this time frame, when they wanted to put a newspaper together, they had to take all the little letters out and put them on a sheet. And the sheet would become what they put into the printing press to run ink over to make newspapers. Instead of typing it on a screen, imagine taking all these little letters, one letter for each letter in each word. You have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of words, hundreds of thousands of letters to do one page of a newspaper, and you have to do that for every single page. Did you stop the Matchbox Diary? In a way, I never did. After 30 years of printing, I opened a bookshop. Books are like newspapers. They show you where you've been. Then I bought and sold antiques, and you can see some antiques here. Full of things that people had saved for years, filled with stories, other people's stories. Wish I could write a diary. Do you go to school yet? To kindergarten. Lucky girl, you'll be writing before you know it. Till then, I bet you're a good collector, like me. What can we tell from this picture? Where's this little girl? Kind of looks like a window. Looks like she's holding a pair of airline wings. Looks like she's got an empty tray. It says candies on the side of it. So it looks like she's going to start collecting things. She's got a little letter in there from her grandpa and little wings from her trip. So even though she can't write in a diary yet, she can collect things like her grandpa did in the matchbooks. Again, we have some realistic fiction. We have some historical fiction. And we have a lot of dialogue. But if you noticed, we don't have she said, he said on every one. We have what is it? That's what she's asking, and Michael's answering. And all of it, when they're each asking, they each have a different paragraph. Okay. Again, she's talking, then she says, I want one too. That's my girl. So we know that there's only two people talking. They go back and forth, and there starts a new paragraph each time. Hopefully this gives you some ideas for your story. Many of you are just about finished with them. Great job. If you've not finished, make sure that you keep working on them. And thank you for letting me crash your writing and reading live stream today and give you a little bit of a lesson on dialogue. Make sure you take a look at the resources that I sent home last week. The rules for punctuating dialogue. And continue to do a good job and good work on getting your historical fiction narrative together. This is your last big writing unit for 4th grade. Almost done. Finish strong and have a great day.